Hi, I'm Sean Williams. The purpose of this video is to, I guess you could call, highlight a guard that is named the Williams Guard. I didn't name the guard, as a matter of fact. My good friend John Danaher named it. I think it would more appropriately be called a wrap, just a wrap under the leg. But the goal I have with this video is to get more in depth of not only the guard, but the situation that the guard presents, the scenario that the guard would come from, the most common attacks, the most common pitfalls, but then really go outside of that, because this guard is not a necessity. So it won't solve everyone's problems in jiu-jitsu. So what I want to present is the situation that you could choose to use this guard or some very similar guards that don't require you to have your arm wrapped around your leg. And that's really where we'll go off into a tangent on some of the video, because I think it's important. The reason why I say that is because this guard, it doesn't require a lot of flexibility. But what I have found, teaching it over the years, I have found is that if you are a broad fella or a broad young lady, you're going to have trouble locking underneath your leg in the appropriate way to get your frame to work. I'm quite barrel chested, and especially these days I have dad weight barrel chest, and even that sometimes will give me a little bit of, not a problem, but if you added leg girth and a huge barrel chest, sometimes that can be a problem. So there are other alternatives that will lead you into the exact same attacks that you can have with our Williams guard or Williams wrap. And I want to introduce those, not per se introduce those, but I want to bring those about so that you have the choice. You have a choice to choose. Do I want to wrap my leg, overwrap my leg, or do I want to use an overhook or a clamp guard? So we're going to really dive into looking at that later. Now, let's just take a look at what the guard is and what some of the common goals will be. And potentially, I mentioned that it relates to some other things, and we'll take a brief look at that. So is it a guard? It's a guard that it requires Kyle's arm to be around my waist. That is the requirement that you must have to have this guard. So his arm is going to be wrapped around my waist. I'll be on my side. We're going to take a look at just the real meat and potatoes of how we lock up the guard, or what it is. The actual guard had a couple stages. It had two main stages. It had one where we overwrap our leg, and my right hand in this case held his trap, my training partner's trap, or / shoulder. And then the stage two was it evolved to a frame, and that's where the current guard lies. Although I tend to use this quite a bit. But this is essentially what the guard is. It's an overwrapping of my leg with a hand on the trap or a frame, and we're really going to talk a lot more in detail about why those things exist. But let me explain why stage one was a hand on the trap. How the hell did this guard even get made? So I saw a guy, and many of you might know this story. So if you do, fast forward through this, please. But I saw a guy named Nino Shembri. He came to the school, a very talented young man, a black belt under Renzo, compete and train as well. And he was extremely flexible. He would bring his foot to his face and omoplata pretty much everybody that I saw him train with and compete against. And he had massive success with this. Well, back in that day, I had pretty good flexibility that way too. So I had some success pulling my foot to my face and then just presenting omoplata as an option based on mere flexibility. What changed for me was we had a fight training day. Rodrigo Gracie was preparing for an MMA fight, and a couple of the guys had tank tops on, so the shoulders were completely exposed. So of course, as we started to train, the sweat started to intensify, and what used to work of me pulling my foot to my face, all of a sudden these guys were standing up and getting out of omoplata. And so I wrapped my arm around my leg and held my training partner at that time's trap, and when he tried to pull up and out, of course my hand stopped that, and I was able to secure an omoplata. So if you can imagine, because there's a rebound effect, and so if you can imagine, I had this position where we were here, and I used to, say I had all this flexibility, and I would pull my foot up over and omoplata. I'm sure many of you have seen this scenario, and it's all good, but I had no general concern with anything except pulling my leg over his head. Well, if you have no general concern with anything, there is nothing stopping someone from keeping their head relatively over you. So if you're extremely flexible and you can bring your foot in front of your face, well then you can score omoplata. But you can imagine if I had shorts on and he has a sweaty shoulder, that it kind of just brings his body to the ceiling, lifts up. That's exactly what would happen. And so I was left with, this training partner was only the same level as me. He wasn't more experienced than me in this position, and omoplata was working so well before. Well, all of a sudden, sweat completely annihilated my game. So it just happened to be by accident that he said, hey, wait a minute, his arm is slipping. So in this position, it's not a far stretch to imagine if you held the arm, that when he tried to pull up and out, he pulled up, it snaps down with a rebound, and then I was able to get an omoplata out of it. So I said, hey, rock on, we got a new move. It works again. It's just by putting my hand under my leg. Well, then that works for quite some time. That worked for quite some time until my training partners started to realize, move a little bit like that, perfect. That if all he did was drive his head into my right shoulder and flatten me out, all of a sudden my guard I'm stuck again. Even if I'm flexible, guys could just stall me out, and I lost all my attacks, or majority of my attacks, and I felt like I was working so hard to get an omoplata. And again, if I pull the foot in front of the face and they're right in touch with me, one or two jerks, I might be able to get a quick omoplata, but then I'm out of position, and then guys start killing my guard again. So what I quickly found out that was if I put a frame in front of their head, that stopped that drive. So if I had this, and the current problem was guys are moving their head to this shoulder. Well, if I could create some sort of frame, which just happened by happenstance, then when he drove in, it changed everything. Okay, it didn't allow his head to move over my shoulder, and then all the attacks started to happen. Now, let me say, there's a caveat to this. I was already a blue belt at this time, and it was around 98, 99. I was training every single day for hours and hours a day. I had already learned how to do the very basic guard with an overhook and get your knees in, and what we now call clamp guard, and then go into what we now call trap triangle, and attack from closed guard scenario based on an overhook, because we had many guys fighting in MMA or going into MMA. So overhooking and getting my knee into this gap was a big deal. This was a big deal in our academy at the time because people were fighting. So one of the positions that we would score in general was this position where I'm holding my far shin, his arm is down by my hip, and it's a nice punching position, and then it's nice to go into triangles and different things like this. This is something that I already had in my arsenal. So when the frame came on, it related directly into that situation, which we're going to carry into that later and we'll look at the details of the overhook guard and getting into clamp and so forth and so on. But that's why the frame, I think, made so much sense to me early on, is that, oh, this is just another way to get to trap triangle, to get to omoplata, to get to the arm lock on the far side, which might be unique because of the frame, more unique than the overhook. I think the far arm lock is added and intensified when you have a frame. We'll look at that in a minute. But that was the general premises. I will say that techniques are made all the time. In my opinion, they're often not. I say this was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was made by necessity, because necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention. So, and this is true for this. I had to hold the trap under my leg, or else this would have kept sliding out. I had to create a frame because my opponent or my training partner was driving into my shoulder, and then all these things started to play into what created this small little system. And I'm going to share that with you, and we're going to share also again what the overhook and the clamp guard are in the subsequent videos. I'd like to take a quick look at some of the problems that will be circumventing on some of the videos today, because there are some problems that we've got to solve. And when Kyle locks the guard on, and we've already established that if he doesn't have a frame, probably the biggest problem of just holding the trap is going to be me driving him flat. And then if I have any sense whatsoever in the closed guard and understand inside ties and understand how to leave, which we'll look at in a second, I can create massive problems for him. So by just having the hand on the shoulder, it's a fine position, and if he intensified it by holding the shin, fine position. But there are some major problems that are even more difficult to solve when you're flat. So when the frame comes on, some things that we're going to need to have a workaround for. One, we're going to need to have a workaround for if the hand stays up here under the shoulder. You don't really want that. I want, or Kyle in this case, wants my arm down by the waist. So we'll take a look at how to get that down here. I don't really want the arm up like this, because this is not a good idea for me to have that frame and have somebody's arm up like this. So we're gonna need to understand how to get around that. We'll understand little minor problems of a guy just trying to stall you out. So just holding and staying tight. This guard wasn't created as a stall method. I didn't believe in stalling. I believed in submitting people. So this isn't a guard that you just sit and hold someone. Let's make sure that we have that straight. Now, could you? Absolutely. If you were in an MMA fight and had this locked up on someone quite well, you might be able to use this just to get back to the standing position. But that was not my intention. We didn't have time limits at Renzo's, so it wouldn't pay in my training to hold someone for 45 minutes. It would only pay for me to try to work my submissions and get better at jiu-jitsu. So it was made to solve these problems. I made things to solve these problems, not just to hold someone down. So once again, we're going to have to solve that, okay? We're going to have to solve the fact that the guard is open, because I don't prefer to lock my feet. Now, again, if you wanted to hold someone, you might want to lock your feet, but I don't care to lock my feet. So one problem we are going to really have to face is the problem that I can circle out. And if Kyle's super naive, not only can I circle out, I can jump across side. So if he's really naive and holds the guard or doesn't quite understand it, well, I can just move around his legs and counter and go into omoplata and be completely out. That's a massive problem. So we'll define that and define solutions for that problem, because it's important. I will say that one thing about the flattening out, okay? When you're gonna see that when we do this primary guard, we're at an angle all the time. I don't like to be flat. In Kyle's position, I'm not a fan of being flat, no matter how flexible you are, because there are inherent problems with being flat. When he's holding a shin, he's got that overwrap of his leg and he's holding my shoulder. My arm is on the floor. Even if he's grabbing his shin, okay? One thing that we have to worry about when we're flat is if I'm able to get my head over his head, whether his guard is locked, can be closed guard, and can be have a very tight rubber guard. There are major problems when we're flat and I'm allowed to put my head over, directly in line with Kyle's. What can happen is I can literally move my way, slide my way up and out. So can you lock your feet for me and keep that as tight as you can? When I can get my head over his and prop my hips up and keep my thumbs down and duck my head, that's the problem, okay? And you'll oftentimes get omoplata. This omoplata is a fine solution to that problem with one major caveat. When he hits an omoplata and I had my head over his, an omoplata when the head my head is over his and the knees are over his chest is a massively weak position, okay? And it does not take much for me to keep the knees over the chest and head and simply pull out. Okay? We don't have gis on. We don't have the advantage of grip, of false grip with sleeves. We don't have the false grip of a collar. So it can be a massive problem. So we need to take a look and solve these problems that surround not only this guard of having an overhook and so forth and so on. So I'm excited to go over that shortly. Now, let's take a look at a skill set that you will all need. Everyone is going to need. And I think it is vastly under-practiced, and that is pummeling. If you want to have a good closed guard, you need to be a master of pummeling. And there are several things that will go. You can pummel up to the middle, you can pummel down to the middle. But for this particular setup, I need an arm around my waist. And even all relative guards that relate to this, whether it's an overhook, whether it's a John Danaher's clamp guard, that is what I need. The only way I'm going to get there are two ways that I'll get there. I'll pummel the person's arm to get there, or it'll be a reactive approach to creating a scenario where a training partner hugs my waist, and that can be from up and overs. It can be trying to take the back. Any scenario that he has to react and hug my waist is a reactive scenario. He's reacting to something that I've done, and he's hugging my waist. Or a much more proactive approach, which means I am on the move, I am pummeling, and I'm creating scenarios that put his hand on the side of my waist. I cannot stress enough that you must master pummeling if you want to have a good closed guard. And then we'll take a look briefly too at when I need to open the guard. I feel that closed guard is a system that if we don't have, in my opinion, I like the word, my interpretation of closed guard is he needs to be down. And the reason why he needs to be down, he cannot have his posture up, it goes back to the fighting roots of jiu-jitsu. If he's got his posture up, then there's a good chance that I'm going to be taking some punishment. So pummeling is a huge ordeal. Now in the sport, it doesn't matter. Someone can be seated up. They can even be standing up, and my legs can be locked, and that's totally fine. We'll try to make some differences and differentiations of when I would open my guard for sport versus fighting in a few minutes. But pummeling. Ideally, we want to create angles when we pummel. You hear the term angles all the time. Create an angle, create an angle, create an angle. I define angles two ways in the closed guard, although they are angles based off of him. When we angle our hips to the side, it's not so easy to see that we're angling off of our training partner. So it is really easy though to see that I'm angling from the floor. So when we're here in the guard, when we make an angle, okay, I make an angle by bringing my hips out. we do have a slight angle off to the side, but that's really difficult to see. I've made an angle on my hip, but really the angle is more relative to the floor than it is to him. If the angle was off of him, it would be so slight by the time you drew a triangle, it might be like 15 degrees or something like this, versus the angle on the floor is nearly 90. I mean, I'm almost perpendicular to the floor right now. So that's one type of angle. The other type of angle is I stay flat relative to the floor, but I really do create an angle off of my training partner. I mean, that's a massive angle. Now you can see that I've moved into a perpendicular angle based off of my training partner. Much easier to see. So we need both of those angles. You're going to have to create angles using your legs relative to the floor, and you're going to have to create angles relative to your training partner that are going to give me attacks where I don't have an angle off the floor at all. My back is completely flat, and that's fine. In some scenarios, our back can be completely flat. Other times, we're going to need to be on our side. I like to make a generalization. Generally, when your back is flat, you're submitting someone. If my lower back is flat, or my upper back is flat on the floor, generally, I'm submitting them. I'm in a submission, working my submission holds. When I'm on my side, we're generally setting them up or holding them, with the exceptions of course, omoplata when we get on our side in Kimura's. I said this is very general. This is not a rule. This is a generalization. Because if I said it's okay to be flat on your back in the closed guard, I'd be lying to you. It's not okay to be flat on your back. We should be moving, but if I said that as a rule, I would be incorrect, because if I have an arm lock, a Jujigatami from the guard, or a triangle, or something like this, well, I am going to be flat on my back. I'm going to be flat on my upper back or flat on my lower back, depending on the skill set I'm using. So angling we're going to be using, but you'll see angles relative to the floor. You'll see angles relative to my training partner. And I'm not going to stay here and keep making that, hey, I'm going to make an angle relative to the floor. I'm just going to talk about angles. We need both of those. And how do we create those? And more importantly, we're going to look at how we're creating that angle of relative to the floor by getting my hip sideways, because that's really going to, and pummeling, that's where we're going to want to get to once we've began our pummeling. There are 3 very good ways to create angles with my legs using my training partner's legs. And if we looked at those 3 to create that angle relative to the floor, one is using my leg. Okay, I tend to call this a stiff leg method, because I'm using, my leg becomes pretty stiff, and I'm using his thigh to move my hip and my body into a side-on position. 2 is to use the floor. It's easy to use the floor to move my hips out to the side. Or 3, it's to use his hip, to use my hip, to move my hip and my body off to the side and create that angle from off the ground. So all of those are 3 of very, very good ways. My caveat to using the floor, although it's an exceptional way, we have to be very cautious that he's not able to step over this leg. They can sometimes circle the knee over the top of this foot, and now I end up in a half butterfly guard. So this is quite common. Back in the day, there was a guy named Terere, one of the best guys at his time, and he would do this if you left the foot lazy on the hip. He would circle the leg over the foot and trap the foot. So it isn't too far-fetched that if he has his base about him and I put my foot on the floor, there is that potential risk of him stepping over your foot and putting your foot into the half guard. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. This is a great way to move your hips, but just be aware of that. Most of the time, I like to use an initial foot on the hip and stiff leg method, and then go to a foot on the hip if I need more movement or if I need to hold him better at that angle. I don't usually use the foot on the floor unless I have some sort of problem using the stiff-legged method or the foot on the hip. They're all 3 great ways to move, and I just want to bring to your attention that if you do use the foot on the floor, just be aware that if someone steps over you, you need some sort of follow-up from that. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that's a good thing, but you'll just need to be aware of it. It might be something that you never run into, but it's a good idea to be aware of that. one of the things that we really need to take a look at too is how you use your legs. I think it's often said that when you're breaking someone down, you've cleared arms, no matter how you've cleared your arms. You need to use your legs to move your training partner forward. If you don't use your legs, you're fooling yourself. Your legs are the most powerful part of your body. So I need to use my legs to bring my training partner forward. So if I'm Kyle's in my guard, you'll hear a terminology when we clear arms, however we might clear arms. Let's say we use one of the more simple approaches where we just took double inside. If I don't use my legs, there's nothing stopping him from sitting back and just keeping his weight back. So I could have a training partner here and I move his arms, but nothing happens because there's no weight coming forward. When we're in the passing scenario, I tell my students, you can push as hard as you want on someone. There's a difference between pushing and putting weight into your arms. He should push me. And if he pushes the right way, it's going to keep me flat on my back. It's going to keep my hip isolated. And he can do this, meanwhile, without any weight in his hand. So say I move this to the side, Kyle doesn't fall down. But if he pushes as hard as he can on my chest, he can keep me flat without falling. Okay, so how do we create the weight? Well, we create the weight with our legs, unless he is naive. Now, there are passes where he has to put weight into the arms, or double bicep passes where he's going to need to jump up, and there's going to be this like small little opportunity of getting his weight. It's already coming forward. So we may not struggle with those type of things if we catch him into that middle ground. But overall, a good guard passer isn't putting weight into their arms. They're pushing you. We need to weight him on. So how do we do it? We use our legs. Now, there's a method to using your legs. So everybody has a rib cage, okay? And that rib cage, where it starts right around the floaters, is wider than their waist. And that's pretty obvious. And when we catch the rib cage, I don't want my knees at the rib cage. I want my thighs at the rib cage. So if you're dealing with someone where you're sitting up on their hips a little, you need to move your hips up and relock your guard so that your thighs are at the floaters. And when you squeeze the floaters a bit, you get a handle because the ribs are wider than the waist. The waist is going to go in at the edge of the lat floaters, and you're going to be able to pinch that in a bit and get grip with your legs. So when you clear somebody's hands, you have the grip of the floating ribs. You bring your knees up and forward, and you see, now I can create that scenario where I bring him in. If his hands are here and I lock into the floaters, and as I move him, if I bring my knees up and in, now we've created that scenario where bang, there's weight into his hands, and we can now take advantage of putting his hands on the floor and getting the inside position. But if I don't create the weight with my legs, yep, I can pummel all day long, I can hold his head, or maybe I can't because I can't reach it. I need to get it, the weight moving forward using my legs. And again, right now, my guard is locked, but it's the knees that's not what we want. I need the inside of my quad. Now it doesn't have to be deep, but it can't be at the knees. That's very weak. It's going to be a very weak process. Your ankles are actually going to feel like, it's the lock of my ankles that hold him. That's not what you want. You want to lock your legs, and then I have my quads that hold him. And now, yeah, you can bring him forward. Look at his knees almost come off the mat. If I just use my knees, the same method, yeah, it doesn't come forward. But if I use my quads, see, it brings him forward almost with his knees off the mat. So we need to use our legs well. That's important. And I oftentimes hear people say, use your legs, use your legs, use your legs. But they don't talk about is how you use your legs. It's important. These babies, well, mine aren't necessarily the strongest, but in general, the legs are strong, so use them well. I want the inside of the quad, not the knee line, the inside of the quad to pinch in on the floaters, and then we bring the knees in and up, and that will draw your training partner forward over your head. They won't go over your head, but that's where you're taking them. You're not bringing them into your chest. You're taking them over your head like a tomoe-nage, but they won't end up going there because they're locked in your legs. It's not, I don't want to bring him here. I want to bring him forward excessively, and the result of a resisting opponent or training partner will be a happy medium. Okay, let's dive into some pummeling. And some many different scenarios that we can create to actually get to the inside, which is what we're going to want for the purpose of what we're doing today, and combating some common problems. The first one that we're going to talk about, I love to teach this one because it's a common way to open the guard. It's not so much pummeling, it's how to use our legs and combat elbows. So it's sort of unfair that I might call this pummeling because it's not. And there are a few on here that might maybe a stretch to call pummeling, but it is getting the arms to where I want them to be, which is around my waist. So I'm sure many of you have trained with people that use their hands and dig their elbows onto the inside of the thighs. This is a position that I really like to dispel. Now there are two relative levels to where Kyle can be. One is an early position where he's got the hands on the hips or the belt if it's a gi, and the elbows are just starting to tuck in. What we need to do if we're going to beat this position is I'm going to get both of my palms to where his elbows are in the middle of my palms if I can. And our fingers are going to go and grab the bone of where the radius and all meet the humerus. What we're going to do is we're going to pry his elbows out. But that's not so easy, especially if he's Herculean like Kyle is. So when we want to pry this elbow out, we're going to create a shake. Okay? We're going to start shaking or pumping my legs. And as I shake or pump my legs, what's going to happen is it's going to attack the small stabilizers of the shoulder and the small stabilizers of the lat. And it's going to be exceptionally hard for anyone to keep their elbows pinned into your thigh. This is an early approach. His elbows just go in. I'm able to get the elbows, shake, 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 shake. And once the elbows are outside of my thighs, we then use the legs like we have just talked about. I use the quad squeeze at underneath the floaters. I bring his head over the top of mine, and I continue to pull his elbows out and wide until the hands make it to the floor. Once the hands make it to the floor, now I'm coming back up and I'm going to go head control, and I'm going to start to angle off the ground, and this is when we can start going into our subsequent attacks, whether it is our Williams guard or whether it's an overhook or whether it's clamp guard. Okay, we have all this scenario. So we'll look again at elbows are inside my legs and they just get there. So I have the wherewithal to see him, I have the wherewithal to get underneath the elbows, and then we're gonna shake, 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 shake. The elbows come out, I squeeze the quads, and we don't bring him into our chest, bring him over our head. The result will be he will fall into my chest. Once he's here, we've now made our angle off the floor, and we can start looking to overwrap our leg, overhook his arm, or go into clamp guard scenarios with our elbow and far knee. Second one, because there are I mentioned there are two stages to this. So the second stage is you have a guy that's dug in. You waited quite a while, and he's digging in, and the elbows are set in. The problem for Kyle is that there's nothing stopping me from sitting up. But the problem with sitting up slowly is that it creates a lot of pressure on my ankle. So on my crossed leg. So as he's digging in, if I just start to sit up, by the time I sit up, boom, the guard opens. That's what he wants. So we're going to use our arms and we're going to swing them up, swing them above my head, and I'm coming up in a hustle. When we come up, My goal is to come up to his shoulder and headbutt his shoulder. Not really what it is, but I just did. So we're gonna come up to his shoulder and C-clamp my hands. When we C-clamp, the hands that, I like to say that the hand that is long, which in this case is my right arm. So my right arm is opposite of my head. That is generally the hand that's gonna be facing down. Okay? This hand is gonna face up. This hand is gonna be facing me or down. If I was to grab this way, it would face down. That's also a very nice general rule that you could keep in mind. When you guys are locking grips, this is a bit off tangent, but it's a great concept to think about. When you're locking grips from the feet, from the floor, if you have a long arm, I call it a long arm. It's not even longer than this one, but it's the arm opposite of your head. It is not always, but generally, it's a good idea if that hand faces down or sometimes away, if I go C-clamp. So if I had then over under clinch, and this was on the feet, we're gonna stay on the knees just for the purpose of the video, and I wanna lock my over under clinch, it is a good idea that my long arm stays down, in this case a little bit of away until you turn it, and then it'll be down. It's a very good idea. If I'm passing butterfly guard, and I have butterfly guard, and I'm choosing a body lock style pass, it is a good idea if my long arm opposite of my head stays facing down rather than facing up, okay? This is no different when I'm in this guard scenario. His elbows are dug in deep. If I come up to this side, my hand's gonna stay facing away from me, which would actually sort of be down, away or down, and that's gonna give my arms, my grip, a much stronger advantage. We shake our legs, we bring Kyle in. I can easily now go to the head of the elbow and begin moving my hips. On this second one, sometimes you'll get the luxury of having someone naively put their hand so deep that it almost hurts his wrist. So there's a very small chance that when you come up and you bring him down, that you may actually be able to submit someone with a cow hand. This is a possibility. It's just pretty rare, but it does happen. And if you feel it, you can take advantage of it because this sets up a cow hand and it also sets up a very easy Kimura. So bringing the elbows out. Let's go through a couple different angles. So we get here, stage one, his elbows just set in. I get the hands back and we shake. We bring our knees in, his hands go to the ground. I'm able to collect his head, and now we go into our various guard positions. Stage two, deep. It's deep. I can't get the hands in there. I don't have much more time, so we take our hands over our head. I come up to the side. We still shake the legs. That's so important that we shake the legs. And then I'm gonna get his head, and we're gonna move off and angle off to the side. One thing with pummeling, you hear it time and time again, or posture, I would say. It's pretty safe to say that controlling someone's head is safe to say that it's the best way to control somebody's posture. Now, once you pull their head down, I can control his posture with overhooks and with over wraps of the legs. What I would say, maybe the Williams wrap, like I said that in the beginning of the video, a Williams wrap might be a more technical way to define this guard. But whether it's that or an overhook, you can hold someone for a while, but you ultimately will lose control of their posture eventually. One way that you can maintain someone's postural control is to pull his head down. If we all know that our spine is attached to our head all the way up here in the back of his head. If I'm pulling Kyle's head down, well, it's very difficult to make his posture. If your head gets pulled down and you are more forward than your hips, the only way to get your head back straight is to alleviate that and regain your posture, or get your hips lower and under your head. In this case, if my head is down, I can't bring my hips any lower and under my head to make my spine straight. In a case where I was on my feet, if my posture was being brought down, I could easily get my hips under my head and regain some posture. But in a closed guard, you just can't do that. You can't go any lower and you can't come any forward because my legs are in the way. So again, a good way to break elbows down of a very solid opponent. We'll look at two techniques of pummeling here together because one is, we've already sort of looked at it. Remember, pummeling, one of our key components to having an actual good closed guard. We'll take a look at this from a couple different angles. If my opponent is fairly naive and I can bring both arms in and use my legs, that's great. We put the hands on the mat and I'm able to get his head. Usually what happens is that I am able to secure his head in the beginning of being in the closed guard. It doesn't magically happen generally when we've put someone in a closed guard or jumped to the guard or recovered guard when he's passing or from cross-side. It generally doesn't happen that he's already in amazing posture with his hands on pushing me down. That usually doesn't happen. We'll usually have some time to get a hand around the neck and hit what my good friend calls an overtie. Okay, this is a position you're going to have to deal with a lot when you're pummeling, is that you're not going to be able to get your hand in on the first time. Pummeling is generally a two-stage process when we're talking about getting guys' arms on the side. So Kyle has both arms on the inside. He knows that that's a good position. He may have hands on biceps. He may have hands in the tendon of the arm. Something that's good for you guys to think about. If I have an overtie, there is no bicep. I mean, there is, but there's no bicep present, so that then his hand is going to have to stay in the tendon of my armpit. Let's take a look at that real quick. Let's go off tangent and take a look at why. This is huge, actually. This is a very important theme in guard in general. Okay, my hands should be monitoring his biceps and the inside. Okay, anywhere on the inside is a very good place for my arms to be when I'm in a passing scenario. I would love to keep his hands off of me and him on the outside until I'm able to get my posture or until I'm able to move to the standing position and then build my base up. Okay, you don't have to stand up. You don't have to gain posture first to stand up. You just have to stay free long enough to stand up. So if biceps are present, then you're going to be on the biceps. Now, there are all kinds of fun ways to hand fight and keep guys 2-on-1s and stand up using a 2-on-1. But for me to grab his wrist is not hard for him to counter. One common thing that you might think about is, if you ask yourself right now, who's in control, me or Kyle, what would your answer be? This is something that's relative to jiu-jitsu everywhere. If you ask yourself right now, am I in control or is Kyle in control? What would you answer? What would your answer be? You got one? Good. Control is all relative. It is based on, am I doing what I want or am I doing what he wants? I have a grip on him. If he pulls his hand up to his shoulder and I follow him, and that is not what my goal was, he is controlling me through my grip. I'm not controlling him. I have a grip, but I'm not controlling him. If he puts his hand up to his shoulder and I follow, and I have just extended my arm in this scenario, and he pummels through, he doesn't even need to pummel through, he can hold my head and bang, go on a quick arm lock. I've just given him what he wants. Okay? So hand fighting in general is great as long as, in a closed guard, is great as long as I understand who is in control or when I am in control and when I'm not. If I am hand fighting and I'm going, hey, I'm all in on this wrist, and he brings his hand over his shoulder and he can even use the aid of his other hand, and then he uses his legs well, and he pulls me in, I have not accomplished what I want to do. I'm not in control of this passing scenario. So we need to be very cautious on hand fighting. You have to understand that. If he pulls his arm up to the shoulder, I let it go and I get up. That's where I've been in control. If I don't want to be here, now if I want to be here, that's okay. If I have something to follow this up with, an elbow or something like this, it's MMA, that maybe that's relative. So I like to say generally that when you're passing, you own the inside. Okay? And I could hand fight to set up, do different scenarios, but I own the inside, biceps or tendons. If Kyle has an over tie of my arm, he's over the top. He's a collar tie, but he's over the top of my collar tie or inside hand. I need to own his tendon. I need to get my knife edge part of my hand and I need to put it in and under the chest, the pec tendon right here that runs into the deltoid. Okay? That tendon becomes an exceptionally good handle for me to attack. And it'll kill off this, it'll kill off a shin grip. We can take a look at that later, but it'll totally annihilate a lot of different problems for me on the passing side. So if there is no bicep present, right here is his bicep, but I can't own the inside. I can own the outside, which is another good option, but he's on the inside if I go here. For today, that's not what we're talking about. I have to own the inside in general, okay? So if I own the inside, I want to be in and up on that tendon, and then I can start prying myself away to keep those inside ties. Okay, so let's lay down. I'll lay down now and look at what we need to do to overcome that problem. He's on the insides. Okay. First of all, what if he is hand fighting? What if he grabs my wrist? He's elected to do basically a 2-on-1 to start his posture. As I just mentioned, as long as I can use my other hand to lift his arms up and then use my legs well, wow, he's just gotten to the ground and I've now killed off hand fighting. Remember, we need to use our legs. I want to bring him forward. I don't want to let him hand fight me and just relax and have this posture. Okay? So if he's hand fought, we can use our grip or his grip against him to maintain that control. Okay? Back to the overtie. Okay? Now I've got an overtie. He's got the tendon. This doesn't last long. My overtie will not last long if he is in on that tendon. So I need to get on my pummeling quickly. And what I prefer to do is open my bicep. Let him have the bicep. Because it's easier to pummel when he has the bicep than it is the tendon. Why is it relative, though, that he has my bicep? If he has the tendon, depending on the arena that we're in, this isn't good for him. If my bicep is out here to the side and he chooses a tendon and I were able to punch or elbow, it's not a good idea for him to have my tendon, okay? If he does have my tendon, here's what we'll do. We don't need to worry about the bicep anymore, okay? We go cougar paw. I call this a cougar paw, this hand where it's very thin. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but I like the term cougar paw. I think it's a kung fu term. And we go under the elbow, and then we are able to get our hand on the inside. I'm going to the head. I mentioned a little while ago, this is a two-stage process. Pummeling is a two-stage process, if he knows what he's doing. This, we just explained, is going to kill off my overtie with relative ease. So what I really want, my ultimate goal, is to have a collar tie where I'm on the inside. This will give my second pummel a lot more power and I'll have a lot higher chance to get on my side. So I've got the inside. It's going to take him some time to re-pummel that hand. As that hand is re-pummeling, guess what we're doing? We are now winning the inside and creating an angle. And that's where our two-stage process of pummeling with the head is super important. Okay, so again, generally speaking, he doesn't have his posture right away, so I take a quick overtie. This will buy me some time, but if he's good with this tendon, it's not going to take him long. If he is not on the bicep, he's in the tendon, we use a cougar paw right at the elbow. And I'm going to bring my hips up and down. It is extremely naive
to think that Kyle's just going to let me in here for free. He will not. That will be packed tight. And my arm will be stuck. Okay? If I'm trying to pummel up through the middle, which we are for the purpose of this video, because we could pummel down through here, but I'm not pummeling there yet. We're going to pummel up through the middle first. If I'm trying to pummel up through the middle, I need to create space on his elbow, from his elbow into my ribs. The only time, or the best time I should say, to create space in jiu-jitsu is on our way down. So if I'm moving up, I am pushing his elbow with my body up. When I move down, I can essentially fall sooner than him, right? Now, falling faster is relative. Gravity pulls everything at the same rate of speed. But I can fall sooner than him. Our ascension, we move up together, but then as I fall, there's going to be a space and we fall down together. So when I'm here and I go up and then down, the space happens when we come down. And now my hand is in, okay? The hand is on the inside. Now, is it a good idea to try to get to the outside? Absolutely. It's absolutely a good idea to try to work an angle off the ground. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you're going to get in here and he's already going to be working. Yep, you're going to feel that. And you're going to get the control of the head, and you need to be on the other side now. So now I know I need to create the space because he had the tendon. And by the time he has locked this tendon into play, it's now too late. We've got an overhook or we've got a wrap, and then I can isolate the head and I can start looking for the frame, or I can look for an overhook, or we can start going into clamp guard. So it's just super important that we understand pummeling. In this case, we're taking a look at head control with an overtime, and this time he'll have a bicep. So now we had an inside, we had the tendon, now he's got the bicep. Bicep, if he controls my bicep, I can't get my arm down there. Because every time I move my elbow down, my hand, he'll follow me. So our idea of pummeling when he's on the bicep is a bit different. We just lay our hand down, okay? And what happens, we lay our hand down and then we move the hips up, and that creates the space. Now my hand gets under, and now as I come back down, I close it. Close the elbow, the arm will fall off your bicep, and we get to the head right away. 2 stages, unless he's naive. If he is naive to pummeling and he just, accepts his arm, okay. Or I'm just better, I'm more experienced. It could happen. It's not wrong to go right on the overhook right away. My preference on higher level people is to get the head right away. And then he'll start winning the inside, and then I'm off to the races on the other side. Okay, and I've systematically broken down. The other thing that can happen right now, Kyle's being very good for competitor-wise. There's a lot of experience, I can tell. Here's the other thing that can happen. This happens more in fighting, and if he's in a hurry. He can take the inside and he can take the bicep. And then he tries to make his posture. He literally starts moving his head up and he starts pressing me away. Boom, there's a tension right here. Again, this will kill my overtie. It will not last long. But there's a lot of tension. When there is tension, and there's tension in the bicep, we have a better chance of winning the pummeling battle on the very first attempt. Why? Because there's so much weight coming down into his hands that the harder he pushes up, when I pummel and beat him, the harder he falls. And now this hand is busy. It can't win the inside as fast as what it could before. And now we can get out to the side, overhook the wrap of the guard, so forth and so on. So if there is weight, we may win it on the first. If we don't have to do we may not have to do a 2-stage process. If you have a crafty veteran and your training partner is crafty and they're patient, they understand pummeling, he may not push up like that. There may not be that weight hit the floor where his hand hits the floor, and we have to have our 2-stage process. So let's look at the weighted position again. He's got an inside tendon. I'm pulling him in. He's got the bicep, and he's hasty. He's getting out of here, or he's getting up to hit me, one of the two, but he's pushing up hard. When we pummel in, the hand falls. As I bring my hips back down, the elbow closes, and listen to the sound of his hand. Can you put a lot of weight in? Push hard. That's what you want to hear. If you hear that, you're good. we will most likely be able to get our overhook, our wrap, the Williams guard, or go into clamp immediately off of that first pummel. But if you don't hear that without that weight, if you hear this, he's going to be able to pummel quickly, and you need to stick to the 2-stage process of having the head and getting the inside ties.